War. War never changes.
But if that's the case, when and why did war start in the first place? Hello guys, and welcome back to another installment of Trey the Explainer. Last time, in Anthropology Profile, in the Disabilities and Prehistory video, we talked about how prehistoric and ancient peoples could be compassionate, capable of displaying great kindness, care, and love towards family members and friends, with seemingly no direct benefit to themselves, and if anything, doing so despite placing an obvious burden on their communities. I showed how the fossil and archaeological record does not support the fully brutish and cruel, primitive savage apes often depicted by media. Well, today, we will examine the other side of prehistoric humans, the darker side rather than the light. I think humans are best described as gray creatures, capable of displaying both great cruelty and great kindness. And I think the thing that best illustrates this tendency of ours is warfare. It is perhaps our most simultaneously beloved and hated pastimes. Almost every book or TV show or movie or video game made has something to do with it, if it be glorifying it or demonizing it or just showing the nitty-gritty of it. Wars have left an unbelievable mark on our species' history, to the point most of history is concerned in one way or another with war. Wars are used to gauge important time periods and events. A lot of technological advancements, many of the more notable ones we have created, were made in the name of warfare, even if they were repurposed for non-violent usages later. It has been estimated that more than 14,500 wars have taken place between 3,500 BC and the late 20th century, no doubt fought by mostly young boys, but also men, women, and girls, using wooden spears, swords made of bronze, iron, and steel, and of course, guns, bombs, and chemicals. A significant amount of these wars nobody remembers nor knows to their fullest extent their details. Who fought in them? Who died in them? Who won them? What tactics did they use, and most importantly, why they happened in the first place? It is a simple fact that war is strongly intertwined with human culture, at least within the last few thousand years. Some have even said war is perhaps the most human thing about us, conflict and battle itself seemingly defining us as a species. And with that being said, I think it would be very, very interesting to take an in-depth look at the practice of war, biologically, anthropologically, historically, and archaeologically speaking. I'm planning to try to answer a whole bunch of questions I've had with this video. What is war? Is it really unique to humans? And when and why did it all start? So, without further ado, prehistoric warfare and the origins of conflict. Part 1. What is war? Now, to truly discuss warfare and the where it came from and the why, it may be best to try to first answer the question of what even is war, which is actually a much harder task than you'd think. Clearly defining war, anthropologically and biologically speaking, is pretty difficult. The idea, promoted by Rousseau with his Noble Savage, was once held that only civilized cultures could engage in warfare, but most anthropologists today recognize that even chiefdom, tribal, and hunter-gatherer societies have wars of their own, which we'll go over in a little bit. Intraspecies violence, that is, violence between members of the same species, is quite common in the animal kingdom. If it be mere scuffles over morsels of food between two hyenas, or male penguins tackling over one another for the right to mate with a female, or a large male chimpanzee trying to assert his dominance over the tribe. Many animals, especially ones that live in groups, come into conflict with one another. However, it would probably be unjustified to classify many of these fights as full-on wars. But this begs the question, when does a fight between individuals stop being simply a fight between individuals and escalate to a full-on battle? Well, I decided to make a more or less vague list of requirements for warfare. Okay, number 1. War must first be between members of the same species. The Great Emu War does not count. Sorry. Homo sapien versus Homo sapien, for instance. Number 2. There must be multiple individuals working together in cooperation against a common enemy. This has an actual name in biology called coalitionary violence or coalitionary killing. Number 3. A war must be between multiple different combatants or parties with at least two distinct sides fighting against one another, two tribes, two cities, two nations, etc. Number 4. A war must have strategies and battle tactics. From the world wars involving hundreds to thousands of naval ships and airplanes using special formation to attack an enemy, to a group of aboriginals feigning retreat to encircle their overconfident enemy, tactics and strategies have been a crucial aspect of warfare, regardless of the technological or societal sophistication of the combatants. And fascinatingly, many of these battle tactics, regardless of time period or culture, are more or less the same ideas, just sort of recycled. Number 5. Warriors must use specialized tools and weapons explicitly made for killing. Number 6. And lastly, and maybe a little controversially, wars, at least with humans, have been shown to yield what I would like to call unnecessary cruelty. One of the hallmarks of human warfare is the tendency of combatants to go beyond just killing or subduing the enemy, but taking things to the extreme: trophies, torture, mutilation, and so on. And I think this vague list of requirements can apply to pretty much all the human conflicts traditionally labeled as wars. Now, the interesting thing that may be significant to the questions we plan to answer with this video is that some animals fit many of these requirements. Coalitionary violence, perhaps one of the more important on the list, is rare in the animal kingdom but does occur in a select few. Chimpanzees, lions, hyenas, wolves, and colonial insects like ants are the only animals besides humans that engage in coalitionary violence. Chimpanzees and ants specifically are the leading champions behind humanity that participate in the practice of fighting to kill. We will be looking a lot at the coalitionary killing in chimpanzee societies, as the species is our closest living relatives, and perhaps examining their quote-unquote wars, we can get a better idea of what our own, at least in their most primitive state, are all about. Part 2. Monkey Brains. Chimpanzees, as said before, are humanity's closest living relatives, and resemble us in a great many ways, genetically, physically, and societally. Chimpanzees live in large societal groups, typically between 20 to more than 150 individuals. These groups are somewhat of a mix between family members and individuals that have migrated in from other regions. These groups, or tribes, typically dominate or hold a particular region, or territory, called a home range, and defend its resources from neighboring groups. And these resources, fruit, food, and mates, are the source of most chimp conflict and violence. Home ranges are common in many animals, but chimpanzee home ranges are unlike those of related primates. When compared to less violent primates like gorillas, orangutans, and even bonobos, the chimpanzee's lax cousin, it becomes very clear that unlike these species, whose home ranges possess a lot of overlap, and thus a good sharing of resources, chimpanzees have clear and distinct borders, boundaries. And studies have shown that these borders of home ranges are strongly enforced by patrolling parties of aggressive chimpanzees who keep out outsiders, and it's at and over these boundaries that most chimpanzee blood is spilled, between groups, out of a desire for land and resources. Some primatologists, like Jane Goodall, went as far to classify these conflicts over land as wars, and one cannot help but notice that chimpanzee home ranges are curiously similar to something humans have created ourselves, nations and states. And that's not all. In these chimpanzee wars, a lot of the requirements on my list are often met, from battle tactics with ambushes and battle formations, to unnecessary cruelty with mutilation and cannibalism of members of rival groups. Sometimes chimpanzees spend hours biting and attacking corpses for no apparent reason. The chimps have actually checked most of the boxes on my list, with really the only one that they haven't met being using specialized tools. Though some chimp populations have learned to create and use primitive spears to hunt small animals, they do not seem to be used in any warlike capacity. Yet, that is. Perhaps this is the beginnings of war, the dawn of war, and may be similar to how our own ancestors first fought. Unlike their more passive relatives, chimpanzees seem to be far more possessive of resources, more greedy, and in chimpanzees at least it seems that the concept of property and ownership, particularly of home ranges, i.e. land, is the primary source of warfare. And it seems that chimpanzees have evolved this behavior for warfare as a result of environmental factors. Their diet of primarily fruit in an environment that causes such a food source to be sporadic has caused chimpanzees to be incredibly competitive and aggressive over resources. Maintaining a larger home range leads to increased likelihood of survival, and chimpanzees have evolved warlike tendencies as a survival strategy. The related less violent primates, like gorillas, orangutans, and bonobos, evolved in different ways to cope with their respective environments. Gorillas relying on a different food source, orangutans living primarily solitary lives, and bonobos just love sex, and can't be bothered with war. And so, we must ask the uncomfortable question, what does all this mean for humans? At the end of the day, are human conflicts just scaled-up versions of the battles between our distant simian relatives in the dark recesses of the jungle? I'm not sure, but it does seem possible that human warfare has similar roots to that of chimpanzees. The vast majority of wars in human history were fought over conquest rather than ideologies, and some might say not much has changed. The concept of borders and nations, home ranges if you will, which are often defended to death, does lend credence to the idea early humans might have evolved similar survival strategies to chimpanzees, with our love of war being an evolutionary remnant of days long since past. We don't know who won or lost the first war, but I think it is a safe bet that it was probably at least somewhat over resources. These studies very clearly disputes the philosopher Rousseau's take on human nature, that humans are inherently good-natured, and civilization corrupts humans to do war. Instead, it seems that the philosopher Thomas Hobbes had perhaps a more correct idea of humans, that they war against all, and are inherently compelled to do war. It seems civilization is more a tool for war rather than a catalyst for it, and that humans have been fighting amongst one another for eons. Part 3. Massacre. Now that we have tried to address the what and why, let us try to address the when. What is the earliest war or battle we have evidence for? Well, there is a surplus of evidence to show that humans engaged in armed conflict throughout prehistory and all over the globe. 10,000-year-old rock art, made by early humans, often depicts great battle scenes between multiple humans using bows and spears. Perhaps these are their histories, their world wars, their civil wars, and so on. But perhaps the strongest evidence of prehistoric warfare are archaeological sites, the remains of battles themselves. In the essence of time, I will only talk about one such sites, but just know that there are many sites that have been discovered that appear to be the battlegrounds of prehistoric wars. This example, though, is not so much a war as it is a massacre. The lands around Lake Turkana in modern-day Kenya have been the cradle of humanity since time immemorial. Before men and women could fashion stones to sticks to create spears, bipedal apes, some of them likely our own ancestors, had called the region home. Today, the lake is a shrunken shadow of its former self. Several thousand years ago, the lake used to be much larger, and the land around it was lush and fertile. Rhinos, hyenas, elephants, hippos, lions, giraffes, wild dogs, buffaloes, zebras, gazelles, turtles, crocodiles, and many other creatures once lived here. Along the faded shoreline of the ancient lake lies an archaeological site named Nataruk. Nataruk was once one of many camps created by prehistoric hunter-gatherers in the region about 10,000 years ago. These camps would serve as the temporary homes of nomadic hunters who fished the bounty that the lake sustained with barbed bone harpoons. Men, women, and children thrived and bathed in the lake's warm waters. It seems like it might have been an Eden of sorts, a paradise. However, it seems a horrendous sin had entered this Eden. When archaeologists began to examine the remains of Nataruk's inhabitants, they found something extremely disturbing. Bodies have been left here. The skeletons of 27 people, 6 young children, 1 teenager, and 20 adults were uncovered. 12 individuals, 7 men and 5 women, appeared to have been left unburied, left to the elements, with only the sediment of the lake, when the tide came in, preserving their bodies. These individuals' bones told a story of great cruelty. Broken bones, smashed skulls, lesions, fractures, bruises, and projectiles. These men and women had been murdered. Archaeologists soon found that they had the job of trying to solve perhaps one of the oldest cold cases in history. It appears the Nataruk humans were attacked and slaughtered by some unknown enemy. The wounds of the slain suggest at least 3 different weapons had been used. Stone-tipped arrows, a huge club-like weapon, and a close proximity weapon, possibly a blade of some kind. Injuries to the remains, such as hand fractures, suggest the victims might have put up a struggle against their assailants, but besides this, it appears that these men and women stood no chance. 2 individuals who died with the slain skeletons do not show any signs of physical harm to their bodies, but had been killed all the same. The positions of their hands and feet might give insight into why this is. They appear almost as if they were bound tightly with some kind of rope before they were killed. Most disturbingly of all, however, one of these individuals was a young woman who had been in the late stages of pregnancy. Unnecessary cruelty. We will likely never know why these people were killed in this manner. Perhaps it was something as simple as the attackers' desire for their promised land. But one thing is clear indeed. The massacre suggests a certain level of cruelty that goes beyond mere survival. The level of cruelty only humans and perhaps their closest living relatives, the chimps, can really display in all the animal kingdom. And it may make us rethink the question, how much have we actually changed since those days our ancestors spent on the shores of Lake Turkana? There's hope, though. As we saw in our prehistoric disabilities video, humans are capable of great kindness, and also great cruelty as we learned in this video. And I think there is a level of human agency here. I certainly hope that we as a species have the power to decide which type of ape we want to be. But who knows? It might just be in our blood to be gray creatures. And with that, thanks for watching. Sorry if this was a depressing and scary episode. I don't think I should sugarcoat things, but I found this topic really interesting, and hopefully you learned something. It's history, and it's facts, and things can be really cruel and make us feel uncomfortable. But I think it is important for us to take a good look at ourselves. I'd like to thank Simon Roy for making a beautifully disturbing depiction of the Nutaruk massacre. It's unfortunate that this happened to these people, but hopefully we can learn something from their story. Hopefully you found out something interesting and weren't too depressed with this video. Sorry if this was disturbing for anyone. Hope you join me for the next episode of Anthropology Profile, and please make any comments or suggestions in the description. See you guys. Thanks for watching.